Freud's family were poor Jews. Although he lived most of his life in Vienna, he was born in Freiberg, a small town in a northern corner of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
His father was an itinerant. He was already 41 when Freud was born. He was 40 when he married Freud's mother. He was a seller, he sold cloth, and he toured the Austro-Hungarian Empire trying to make money.
There were skeletons in the Freud family cupboard, including a missing woman, his father's second wife. And there was a whole collection of grown-up children from the first marriage. Freud's father had finally settled down with a woman young enough to be his daughter.
This is a kind of Freudian family secret which we know very little about, but there is a record of Jakob Freud marrying a woman called Rebecca in the early 1850s, and she then disappears. We know nothing what happens to her. And the next record we have of Jakob Freud is of him marrying Amalie, who is Freud's mother, in 1855, who is his third wife.
What really is a fact that Freud had a very complicated childhood. And this can be considered one of the reasons why he discovered the origins of neurosis in childhood.
Freud in 1895 had developed a theory of wish fulfillment, but he'd also had a theory of the seduction of neurotics in their childhood by sexual abusers, which led to their neurotic symptoms. This was essentially the theory he was working with, and he was trying to find ways of showing how such memories cause neurotic symptoms.
Freud's idea, his theory of seduction, was that sexual abuse in childhood gave the victims neuroses when they were adults. So Emma Eckstein's early experience in the sweet shop gave her a shopping phobia she couldn't explain. In exactly the same way, a child habitually pulled out of a warm bed grows up to be an adult who shivers hysterically but doesn't know why. Freud also thought that a child abused in the mouth while the abuser holds his head steady becomes an adult who cannot bear to have his head held still, at the photographer's, for instance. These were revolutionary ideas.
So you have this amazing moment when Freud is talking in front of his 50 colleagues. He's giving his first major address in 1896 to the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Vienna. And there he talks about sexual abuse. He says, I've made a major discovery. I found the source of the Nile of psychopathology. That is, I know where human misery comes from. It comes from sexual abuse in childhood. And the men in the audience, 50 of them, look at him as if he had lost his mind. They didn't want to hear this. They wouldn't pay any attention to this. And they said to him, this is a scientific fairy tale. What are you talking about? How can you believe these women? They could not believe that such a thing could possibly be. Now, the reason, I think, is simple. In that audience of 50 men, let's say there were 10 or 20, even 5. Between 5 and 20 of those men had actually seduced, that is, raped, really, a child. Now, those men are not going to be receptive to Freud. They're not going to get up and say, well, you know, you're absolutely right. Not only are you right, I'm actually one of the people that's actually done this to somebody. So I can tell you a great deal about it, and I can tell you something about the effects it's had on my daughter. What are they going to say? They're going to say, you are completely crazy.
His father died in October 1896 while he was working on this theory. And it was this event that caused considerable commotion, despite himself. Caused considerable commotion in his relation to Fliess, which he didn't understand. And it's after that he begins to talk about the father being, his own father being the seducer of his sisters and his brother.
Unfortunately, my own father was one of these perverts and is responsible for the hysteria of my brother and that of several sisters.
Freud, of course, had hysterical symptoms of his own. Their causes, according to his theory, lay in unconscious memories of abuse in his childhood.
Early 1897, he's questioning whether this could possibly have happened, and beginning, some people have said, because he couldn't really stand the thought of his father being a sexual abuser, to reconsider the plausibility of his own theory of seduction. Now, the thing that is clear is that Freud, having become aware of the significance of dreams, his patients and his own, was flooded with a whole series of important dreams after his father's death. And the analysis of those dreams is what we call Freud's self-analysis.
I no longer believe in my theory of the neuroses. The continual disappointment in my efforts to bring a single analysis to a real conclusion, and then the surprise that in all cases the father, not excluding my own, had to be accused of being perverse.
The father disappears from view. But Freud does not talk about any sexual element with his father, nor does he talk very much about the sexual element with his mother, except when he comes upon a memory of moving to Vienna, and he remembers seeing his mother naked and being sexually excited by that.
When I was 2, my libido toward my mother was awakened. We were traveling from Leipzig to Vienna. We shared a compartment, and that is when I must have seen her naked. For the last 4 days, my self-analysis has continued in dreams and has presented me with the most valuable elucidations and clues. To put it in writing is more difficult than anything else for me. I can only indicate that the old man plays no active part in my case.
The culprit wasn't Freud's father or his mother. It was another woman who cared for him as a child.
The prime originator was an ugly, elderly but clever woman who told me a great deal about God Almighty and hell, and who instilled in me a high opinion of my own abilities.
In listing who are the people most likely to abuse children, says that the largest group of abusers are those closest to the child, and he says parents and relatives and nannies and nursemaids are included there.
Today's dream has, under the strangest disguises, produced the following. She was my teacher in sexual matters and complained because I was clumsy and unable to do anything.
So the missing woman in Freud's childhood, the instigator, turned out not to be his father's second wife, but the nursemaid. She may well have been standing quietly to one side, out of shot, while family portraits like these were made. Even her name is a mystery. It might have been Resi, or possibly Monica.
The whole dream was full of the most bothersome allusions to my present impotence as a therapist. She washed me in reddish water, in which she had already washed herself. She made me steal coins to give to her.
Can he be a success in life? Can he make money? Can he be a real man? And through analyzing these dreams, he discovers that the person to whom he owes the possibility of being a real man, of making money, is the nurse, who gave him a good idea of his own sexual capacities.
I asked my mother if she remembered the nursemaid. Of course, she said. An elderly person, very clever. She was always carrying you off to some church. When you returned home, you preached and told us all about God Almighty. It was discovered that she was a thief. Coins and toys belonging to you were found in her possession. A policeman was fetched, and she was given 10 months in prison. I saw myself standing in front of a cupboard, demanding something and screaming while my half-brother, 20 years my senior, held it open. Suddenly my mother walked into the room. What can this mean? I must have heard that the old woman had been locked up, and therefore thought that my mother had been locked up too.
Freud becomes the great, pricker of religious illusions. Pricker is a bad word in this context. Gosh, the great demystifier of oceanic feeling, that sense which we all apparently have in childhood and then lose or want to return to our lives through religion, through the experience of religion.
Sit libera-nos a malo.
Amen.
grateful to the memory of the old woman who provided me, at such an early age, with the means of living and going on living.
Freud was able to forgive her because he had adult mastery now of understanding something more about her and understanding the effect what she did to him had had on him. And ironically, if he hadn't had such a traumatic experience with her, he wouldn't have then been able to struggle to think, to understand the impact of trauma.
He was 40. And at the age of 40, you look at life and your youth differently than when you were very young. I don't know whether for Freud it was not it's a fact. I mean, now he discovered reasons in why his neurosis disappeared.
It's interesting to speculate whether Freud himself wondered why so much of his journey of self-discovery was to do with women bleeding, and whether the birth of his baby, Psychoanalysis, was paid for with the blood of somebody else. Emma Eckstein. Sigmund Freud's heart, shoulder and migraines got better, but he would remain nervous of missing trains for the rest of his life. In 1900 he published The Interpretation of Dreams and became world famous. As for the other three, Wilhelm Fliess ended the friendship. Much later his son, who'd become a Freudian psychoanalyst, accused Fliess of sexual abuse. Emma Eckstein died in 1924 and was quietly forgotten. And nobody knows what became of the nursemaid.